and they were different organizations. The Tulalipes were real organized, you can imagine driving down I-5 with all their stores and their casino and everything. They were a well-organized tribe, and the Swinomish were kind of right behind them, and then the Lummies, and then the Tulalipes, or excuse me, the Puyallups. And the Puyallup leader was Bob Satyatham, some of you may remember the name in the news. He was new into the fishing business, kind of, and so he had a bunch of kids that were fishing, and they had red and green and purple and orange boats, and they would come in at night, fuel up, get a case of beer and some steaks, and none of them ever had any fish in the morning. So after about 2 or 3 weeks, Bob Satyatham came up in his limousine to see what was going on with his fishing fleet. They did catch a few more fish after that. During that time period, like I said, we had all of those boats, and they would raft off the dock, like 50 at a time. We had 3 gas hoses and 2 diesel hoses, and the fishermen would tie up next to each other. It was a long ways down from the dock to the water. Normally at a low tide it was like 20 feet. And so they would just take the hoses and pass them from one boat to the other, and we're trying to ring up the sails, which is a little difficult. At the time, we were delivering fuel to fishermen for 19 cents a gallon. That was gasoline. And this was in early '73. We delivered fuel to the gas stations on the island for 21 cents, and they sold it for 26. So you can see things have changed a little bit in the interim. Oh yeah, so in '73 was also a big fishing year, and that was the year of the Judge Bolt decision. In early '74, Judge Bolt decided that the Indian tribes would get 50% of the fish along with the non-Indians. The non-Indians made up about 90% of the fishing fleet, and the Indians about 10%. So just by a ruling of a federal judge, the non-Indians were cut to 50%, and the Indians got 10% of the fishermen got 50% of the fish. So you can imagine the feelings that went on out there. Our house was right above the store, and we could see out across the straits, which with 300 or 400 boats out there would be solid lights from the fishing boats from all the way across the straits to swim in that area. And after the Judge Bolt decision, there was gunfire out there. Some of the Coast Guard boats were rammed, and it was kind of a real tough time. The Indians who fished alongside the non-Indians prior to that, most of them bought licenses. But after the Bolt decision, the Indians would come into the store, do their shopping, and the Norwegians and the non-Indians would stay outside in the parking lot. When the Indians left, the other fishermen would come into the store and shop. So it was a really tough time during that time period. I'm going to let Connie talk about some of the characters and some of the things that she saw from the inside.
Well, there were no big delivery trucks like you see these days. I mean, the only 2 things that were brought to us was bread and beer and wine. And the beer and wine was delivered by the Lopez Freight Company. And the truck driver was George Orcutt, just a funny man. And he worked hard, and he liked his beer. And on his trip home from town to deliver to us, he would crawl in the back of the truck. And he always kept track of how many bottles he drank coming home, and he'd come in and he'd bring the bottles and he'd pay us when he got there, and then he got them off the drink. And during the weeks that they fished 7 days, we literally ran out of everything. And Bill Carpenter and the Lopez store, so great. We'd only been there a very short time and didn't know all the ropes and so on. And he sold me stuff, and he told me how to do this and that. He was such a help. And then Glenn Cushing owned the Galley restaurant. And the Indians bought a lot of steaks. And I would go up, I'd run out, and I would go up to Glenn and the Galley, and I would buy as many as he could spare, piles of them. it was kind of always like an upside down ant pile down there. It was really, really busy. We had Mike and Wendy Mickle worked with us and just helped us out tremendously and saved our bacon. And one day, a lovely, lovely young lady came in the store, and she had on a big straw hat and had a big red flower up here. And she said, "Hi, my name's Holly, and I was wondering if maybe I could do some baking in your store." So can you imagine how lucky we all were? The goodies and the love that came out of Holly's Bakery all those years are immeasurable. Except for a couple pounds here and there, I suppose.
What year was that?
I can't remember for sure, 75. 6? Yeah, oh, she and Andre, they weren't married, and we had a party for them. We didn't want them to know where the party was, so I don't know why we did. Everybody collected at our house and we blindfolded them and drove them around for 10 minutes and took them right back where they started. Pre-wedding party. And the fuel for the tanks, of course, came by barge, and Ted can fill you in on that, but just I have a funny story. They tie up to the dock, and there were big headers, and so the fuel came from the boat up through, and we had somebody had to be on top of the tanks to make sure that, to tell them when to stop. So Ted and I were up there one day, and it was a lovely day. We poked a stick in. It had a T on the top and a long stick, and then you could say, okay, it's almost there, so slow it down. Well, we were just looking out somewhere, and we were on the diesel tank, and all of a sudden, this geyser came out of the top. And believe me, our underwear was soaked in diesel.
I have one little story that it might seem like it's dull running a little general store and a fuel distributorship, but one day we had a guy that called up. He had a big tugboat, an old tugboat had been converted into a yacht. And he said, "I'd like to come in for 1,200 gallons of diesel, would that be okay?" And I said, "That's fine." So about an hour later he showed up, and as he approached the dock, this was an old diesel tugboat, and it had no transmission in it. So in order to go from forward to reverse, you shut the engine down, turned the something, a valve over or something, and started it in reverse. It was a reversing engine. Well, as he came into the dock, he slowed down, and he thought he had put it in reverse, but he had put it still in forward. So as he was coming in kind of fast, he poured more coal to the boat and hit the dock and took out about 5 pilings. And it was just this huge explosion. It just blew the pilings apart. It practically knocked the store down. And so anyway, he filled up with diesel fuel, and I said, "Well, I assume you have insurance." And he said, "Yes, I have insurance." I said, "Fine, let's go into the office and call your insurance agents," which we did. He called the insurance agent. I talked to the insurance agent. In the meantime, he spilled diesel all over the decks of his nice boat, and his wife was out with big terry cloth towels, big white ones, wiping up all the spilled diesel fuel. So anyway, the insurance agent said, "Yes, we've got insurance, and we'll make it right." So they left, they paid the bill and left, and I didn't hear from anybody after a couple of days, and the dock was pretty badly damaged. And so I called up, and there was I don't know, we're gonna get it done. And so I called the insurance agent, and they claimed they had no insurance on the boat. So I thought, this is really kind of an unusual situation. How can somebody be in an accident and then the insurance company say we don't have any insurance? Think about that with cars. If you were in a big accident and they made a deal with you, the other people are out. So I called up the state insurance commissioner and said, I have this problem, and told them what had transpired, and they said, "Well, you can't do that." And I said, well, that's fine, but they've done it, so what do we do now? And so they said, well, we'll assign an investigator to the situation. And so they assigned an investigator, and the guy's name was Eagle Crow. And maybe some of the elder of you will remember that name. Eagle Crow was one of the Watergate attorneys in the Nixon administration. So nothing seemed to be happening. Apparently they started an investigation, and I called an attorney that I used over in Friday Harbor, John Lindy, who was also a judge over there, and told him what happened. And he said, well, that's maritime law, so that's a different deal. You can't, so there's other remedies we have. So he said, we can seize the vessel. So we filed papers to seize the tugboat, which was in Friday Harbor. And then the man that owned the tugboat got rather serious and decided that something should be done, I guess. In the meantime, I called a friend in the insurance business in Seattle and asked him to check around and see what was going on. He says, well, you got a real problem. He says, they're going to deny insurance. But after we seized the vessel in Friday Harbor, the owner and the insurance company decided that maybe they did have insurance on the boat, so they finally did fix the dock. It took quite a long time. Oh yeah, in the meantime, the Standard Oil had seen the damage. They came in one time with a big barge. The barge held 500,000 gallons of fuel. It was huge. And they saw the damage, they said, we won't come back. So I wrote a letter to the insurance company saying, you guys are going to be responsible for providing fuel to Lopez Island. So we got a pile driver the next week and fixed the place. Oh, the other thing was, the interesting thing, I was up on the north end of the island, and our favorite sheriff that everybody knew at the time, Greg Doss. Here's some mumblings. The guy, I guess Greg was down at the store, and the man who had hit the dock came down with his toolbox. He had his hammer, nails, and a saw, and you need a pile driver, or serious damage was done. And so Greg was down there, and Connie said, well, Ted's on the other end of the island. And so Greg went down and got me from the other end of the island. We came down the island full bore with a siren blasting, screeched to a halt at the Richardson dock, and I ordered the guy off the dock. So there were exciting things that happened. The other thing was we had a clientele that completely ranged around the clock. We had an old pensioner, Charlie, who could neither read nor write, and he would come in every month when he got his pension check, and he couldn't sign his name, so he'd just sign an X on the check, and we had to witness the check so that he could cash it. And then on the other end of the scope, we had Jim Scripps, who came in and made his own ice cream cone, so. So Larry?
Wake up.
So let's look at some more pictures here. We got a few more. This is the dock, sort of how we all remember it. Is that your home up there in the top there? The house?
Yeah.
That's your. You still have that house?
No, we don't. I mean, no, Sean's
It's
bought
still
it.
there, but yeah.
It's still there, yeah. So this is the way it looked when they lived there. So that was probably the you might say the way most of us remember Richardson being.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, there's, you see how far the tide went down, you see how far down it was when the boats happened to come in at low tide. And of course, the tide changes at different time every day. So if you're a fisherman going out, you sleep most of the day if you're a gill netter. And so around 4 or 5 o'clock when you come in, you might end up, you might be able to step off on the dock at high tide. But when a few days later when you came in, you might have a 20-foot drop down to the boat. So
You'll notice the outhouse on the outside of the store too.
Oh,
so that little bump out over there.
Two holder with direct plumbing.
Everybody watch. They had the same sort of plumbing at the Fairyland, the original Fairyland. You got any, another one, maybe? Now this, you might know, we think this, maybe somebody here knows, are those Hoymakers horses? We don't know for sure, but this is obviously, yeah. we're not sure, but this is just kind of points out that I actually remember when I was a little guy going down the road, and there was the old man that lived down at the, by the Bills down in there that was still part of the old Wilson, riding a horse to Richardson Store to buy his groceries. And we've met him on the road one day. This little tiny man with a big long beard on this great big huge black horse riding down the road. And he could barely control it and riding to Richardson to get his groceries. But,
All of Woodmarker's cows ended up on the dock one day.
see?
Oh, no, no.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go one more. Here's a picture of, you could kind of see the worn kind of aspect that we talked about, you know, the tunnel, almost tunnels, because it was not a really big building. The aisles were barely, you couldn't pass with it. Did you have carts? We did have carts.
No carts.
No carts. You couldn't pass two carts in the aisleways.
And one of the, okay, I get to say one more thing, but it's just, okay, it doesn't work, so that's.
It does.
Oh, okay. Anyway, you see the gentleman we was looking at? That was the bulletin board. That was where funerals, weddings, baby showers, everything was posted, and it was right down on the end of that shelf. And that's what the gentleman was looking at. He was reading the signs. And I remember when I got married in 1970, my parents still owned the store, and my mother made a handwritten sign that said, "Please come to Mary Anne and Steve's wedding, you know, such and such a day," and they posted it on the end, and that's what you did instead of a wedding. That's what it had instead of a wedding announcement. And all pertinent information was dispelled right from the end of that cover.
The door, the entryway into the store is where this brighter light is over here, where these two guys are standing. Right, he's kind of leaning on the end of the counter. The penny candy was right there coming in the door, so after all the kids stopped. The ramp, this black thing, is the ramp going up to the upstairs. The meat market was back over in this corner. There's a cooler there. And like you said, you can see the shelves, those cases he was talking about right at the head of the ramp. That is where all the jewelry and all kinds of stuff. Back over in here was where all the dry goods were, the clothing and yard goods for, you know, a lot of people still made their clothes and stuff back when I was. And then down right over here, you can't quite see it, there's a door, right, I think that's it, that white right there, the door, the ramp that went down into the warehouse. And the warehouse actually stretched out over underneath this part too. It was just a great big cavern down in there. All kinds of stuff that from when I was a kid in the 60s, stuff was still there from the 20s. You could get literally anything you wanted. There's a really good picture of what was going on that's in the basement. Those are probably nails or plumbing supplies, yeah. That was what after there was no plastic plumbing around here yet that time.
It's amazing, jackpot.
This is what when you pulled into Richardson, this is what you see. People parked right along here, along this edge, and sometime over here. They widened that out later on and made it so there was more parking over on this side of the road, but right along the edge of that guardrail was where most people parked. There was not any real room on the other side. If you wanted grain or something, you backed your car down the dock, grabbed it out of the warehouse, and got out of the way for the next person to get in. And that little building across from the store, that was where the oil and the grease and kerosene and all that stuff, the smaller fuel products and stuff was stored over there. And that island back over there, that's Charles Island, Woody Island, who would you want to call it?
Scripps Island.
Scripps Island.
Grips, yeah,
Let's go to Scripps Island.
Grips, yeah.
No.
This is, okay, here we are. Probably one of the saddest days for Lopez at that time, because this was marked the end of an era that lasted, you know, like I said, that story did not change from when her dad put it together until this happened. So, you know, it's roughly 70 some years. you know, it was a sad day. This is before the fire. And Becky, we're gonna have Becky address a little bit of this.
What
I
happened?
think,
Dick too?
Oh, go ahead. Becky.
Becky Smith lived in the Hodgson house. They bought the Hodgson property, or the house, and she lives right over here.
We bought the Hodgson house, first time out of the family in 1987 from Dick's mother. And so we lived there for a couple years, and 14, I think, or 15. But the store was a huge part of our lives, as it was with everybody's. My son was 5 when we bought the house, and within about 6 months, Ken and Sue Shaw were the owners of the store at that time. And Micah went down and informed them that he planned to work for them as soon as he was able to make a salary. So that he had his life goal all set. But a few years later, it kind of went up in smoke. The store was so critical to this community, and you really found that out with the fire. The fire started, like Larry said, our house was adjacent, and in those, you can't see it from that picture, but those other pictures, there's windows that were down in the basement. And at that time, Ken and Sue had the office down in the basement. And oftentimes, we saw those lights on because we could see right into there from our place. Because Sue worked on the books after the store was closed, so she was down there in the basement. So seeing light down there wasn't that unusual, but it was about just before 9 o'clock, and one of the other of my daughter's friends lived up in Davis Head, and she called Kara on the phone and said, "We see flashing lights in the basement, and it doesn't look like lights. We're thinking it might be fire." So, of course, we run outside and try to look, and sure enough, by then you could see flames. So Jim Goodrow is whose daughter this was that had called, and so Jim called the fire department, and we looked at each other, and Bob took off running because we assumed that Sue was down in the basement working. And by that time, the flames were really visible in the whole lower part of the store. And within, so Bob yells to me, "Get the car." So I go get the car. None of the fire guys are even there yet. And so we went down, and Ken was standing with the garden hose saying, "I think we can put this out, Bob." And Bob's like, "No, Ken, we need to go. Where's Sue?" And so we found out Sue was up in their house. And so by this time, as soon as Bob got down there with Ken, the windows blew out. And at that point, that fire was just raging. I mean, the flames were 20 feet high instantly almost. And there were huge embers. The wind was blowing pretty strong that night. And so the embers from the store, everyone was concerned about those. And Ken and Sue and Bob's clothes all had burn marks just by the time they got up to our house from the embers landing on them. So we got everybody